Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share screen again. This time I'm going to share my SQL Workbench. If I can find it, there it is. Shaboom. Okay. So this is chapter 8. So let me make a new SQL tab here. Zoom in a little bit for you guys. And chapter 8 is data types. And I didn't even make a recording for it. I'm not going to go into it a whole bunch. It's basically just to get to know the data types is just kind of, well, getting to know them, right? Spending some time with them. And the more you code with them, the more you're going to understand. What's kind of interesting is that the perspective on chapter 8 focuses almost entirely on these functions that have to do with converting the data type from one type to another. And actually, I thought that was a cool thing to do. I thought that was good. So that's what these are kind of all about. So I'm going to do number 1 now. And so number 1, it's a select statement. I guess I intended to have this open over here, but that's okay. I mean, I'm just sharing the one screen here. But if you have the textbook open to that perspective page, it's page 255. Write a select statement that returns these columns from the invoices table. So you guys know me. Right off the bat, I'm just going to go ahead and put kind of the skeleton of the query. Select something or other from invoices, because I know that's going to be the boundaries of it. And then it's looking for 4 columns, all of which have to do with invoice total. And the first thing it asks for is just invoice total. So invoice total. Now I'm going to go ahead and put column aliases on all of these, even though the textbook doesn't ask for any of them, I think. So I'm just going to call this something else as total. And hopefully it'll become clear as we go forward. And with something like this, where it's just asking for a select, and then it's got several different things, which is going to be a different column, I just go ahead and run the query, like after every time. So select invoice total as total from invoices. I'll go ahead and do my control enter, and table x.invoices doesn't exist. So our old friend, use AP. There we go. That might help. I'm going to clear that now. Get rid of that ugly red blot. There we go. And we just tap total, and there we go. It's grabbing all of those guys, 114 rows. Okay, so that's the first one. And then that's just kind of like that's like a control group, right? That's just to see, okay, what is invoice total? And then we'll try doing these other things to it. So basically the next column is going to be converting it to a decimal. Actually, it is. It's going to be converting it to a decimal with only 1 digit to the right of the decimal point. And then it's going to have you convert it to an integer in one way using convert function, and then using the cast function to convert it to also the integer. So those 2 columns will have the same data in them. So let's go ahead and do the format one. So the next one says a column that uses the format function to return the invoice total column, same one, with 1 digit to the right of the decimal point. So go ahead and just throw in format here. And then, of course, whatever arguments are going to be inside of here. But first, I'm going to go ahead, like I said, I'm going to do aliases on all of these. So this is going to be, what is it? They want decimal. So I'll call this as total decimal. I suppose total 1 digit would make more sense even, but I'm just going to leave it at this. Okay, so we are formatting the invoice total column. And this one is probably the simplest one. Basically, you're not changing the data type of this one, right? Format, it's just giving it a slightly different format with the same data type. It's still going to be a decimal. We're just changing the number of digits to the right of the decimal point. So all you have to do for the second argument is just type in 1. You guys probably could have guessed that without me, right? I could have put that on the test on Wednesday, and you guys would have just been all over it. Format invoice total 1 is total decimal. Do a control enter, and bing, there it is. Same data, but now we've got 1 digit to the right of the decimal instead of 2. Okay, so that's our second one. Third one, use the convert function to return the invoice total column as an integer. So this one, if you just jumped right into the perspective without reading the chapter, this one might throw you for a loop. Even if you have a sense like, okay, yeah, this is what the convert function looks like, well, let's go ahead and try it. So it's going to be the convert function. And as with the others, no pun, I'm going to go ahead and do a column alias here, and we will call this total int, and I'm going to call it int1 because there's going to be another one. We're going to do the same thing twice using different means. So the convert function, we are converting invoice total. And I think that what any reasonable person seeing this for the first time might think, oh, it's telling me to convert invoice total to an integer. So I'm going to put the data type here, and it's going to be fine. That makes sense to me. I'm sure that I tried this the first time I did something like this and then probably scratched my head and had to look it up on Stack Overflow to wonder what the heck am I doing wrong here. Let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to do Control Enter. This time I'll be happy to see the error message. There it is. You have an error in your SQL syntax. So here's what it is. There are two different kinds of integers. There are signed integers and there are unsigned integers. A signed integer is like the absolute value. It disallows negative numbers, negative integers. It will not allow any of them in there. If you throw in a negative integer, I'm not sure if I've ever tried that, but I expect that if you did a signed, that if you threw in a negative integer, it would just give you the absolute value, meaning it would just take away the negative sign at the beginning. But I'm not sure. I'm going to have to try that at some point. So you can declare int as a data type when you're creating a column, but you cannot use it when you're converting a column. You have to use either signed or unsigned because it wants to know the specifics to make sure that it can actually make the conversion without suffering like some data loss or whatever. So instead of doing int, do signed. And now it lets us do it. And so that is an integer, as you see, and there's no decimal point, and there's nothing to the right of it, and so on and so forth. So let's do the same thing again. One more column. Use the cast function to return invoice total column as an integer. So same thing, we still want an integer, but we're going to use cast this time. So I think this is the most common way of converting data types. Let's call this total int2. And when you use cast, you use the as keyword on in there. So it's going to be like invoice total as something else. So it can be a little confusing at first, maybe because you've got the as out here, which is, doing the column alias, and then you've got as inside here, which is telling like the new data type that you're using. Oops. So once again, it might be very tempting to say int, and once again, it's not going to work. As before, we need to use signed or unsigned if you want to allow negative numbers. So when you do that, then it's working again, and total int1 and total int2 will give the same data over here. It's two different ways of doing exactly the same thing. So this is it. Any questions about number one? Let's do number two. Okay, so here's number two. Number two, write a select statement that returns these columns from the invoices table. It's going to start off exactly the same way. Let's do a select and then from invoices, like so. And then we'll just fill in whatever columns that it wants. I think it only wants 3 this time. Yeah, so 3 columns, and this time instead of working with invoices or invoice total, we're going to work with invoice date. And as you'll see, I'm going to wind up putting a 4th column in here just to show the absurdity of one of the things that it asks for. Not really, but kind of, sort of. So let's go ahead and do, like before, we have just kind of a control for the first column, which is just grabbing invoice date. And again, I'm going to do column alias for all of these. So now here's something that I want to mention. And I think we talked about this last semester. When you do if you do column aliases and so on, there's a risk that you might wind up accidentally putting in something that really should be in quotes over here. And the way to catch those, it won't catch all of them, but it'll catch a lot of them, is the color coding here, right? In MySQL Workbench, it gives you this blue code when it's a reserved word. Now, this actually, I don't expect this to be a problem. If I do invoice date as date and I do control enter, then yeah, it works, no problem. But it is nevertheless, if it's not a reserved word, then it kind of should be. So whenever I see something in blue here, I just go ahead and just put quotes around it like that. And then I know it's in a string. I could put anything I want in there and it'll be perfectly fine. And there's no change in the result over here. So just keep an eye out for that. If you're creating column aliases or anything like that and you start to see blue, start to think about putting quotes around stuff, even though there's no punctuation or anything. Maybe we'll come up with something here in just a moment that actually will be a problem. See if I remember to do it. Okay, so let's do the next one. So the second column is a column that uses the cast function. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We already know what cast looks like. With full date and time. So return the invoice date with its full date and time. So right down here is the full date, but it's not the full date and timestamp, right? So here is a place where you might think, oh, I'm going to put in date time like this. And this time, wait, is this going to work here? Oh, let's try this. Invoice date. Hang on a second. You don't have to do this. I'm just double checking this because I expected that to show up in blue. And nope, it actually liked it. So I was expecting date time to be a problem because it seemed like I had seen that before as like a function or something like that, but I guess not. So this one will actually work okay. Okay, so this is the cast, which we did up here, which has the as keyword, the as clause in here. So give it the data, input the data, and then tell it, no, we want to cast that as, and then give it the new stuff over here. So cast invoice date as, and it wants the full date and time. And there is something in MySQL called date time. One word, like this. And this is to create the full timestamp. If you want the date, like the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, the second, you want it all. Use that date time. It's one word. If I do control enter here, and here's what it looks like. So there's the year, the full year, right? The two-digit month and day, and then the hour, minute, and second. And it's showing up all zeros there because it doesn't have anything else to go on, right? It started out with a plain old date and asked to add, I mean, it would have had to make stuff up here. So instead of doing that, it just put zeros, which makes sense. Okay, so that's this guy right here. That's a new data type. And let's go ahead and do the next one. Okay, so the third column is going to be use the cast function to return the invoice date column with just the year and the month. So this is the one that I thought was one of their little tricky solutions, right? It's like once you find out what they're looking for, it makes perfect sense. And it actually makes sense within the context of the chapter too, because they're talking about data types and they're talking about converting data types. So this involves kind of an implicit conversion, kind of sort of, where it takes a date and it just stamps the digits of the date into a completely different data format, different data type. Let's take a look here. So we've got the cast, we're using that again, and then as, and this is going to be what's asking for just the year and the month. Okay, this is actually the one I was thinking of. Not date time, but year month. See how this is showing up in blue? Let's go ahead and try this here for a second. I'm going to go ahead and just do invoice date as year month. And this is the one that was going to give me the error message, right? Because, yeah, it's a value, right? It's not something that you can use as a new identifier on a column because it's already a value. It already means something in MySQL. So this is the one that you want to go ahead and, if you're going to use year month like this, put quotes around it, or you could just come up with a different name for it, like just year month or only year month or something like that. Okay, so onto the data here. This is invoice date. Blah. Date. It's cast, so we use the as clause. And this is, like I said, this is tricky. you'd think like, okay, I need to look up all the different date formats here. There must be a date format or date data type that returns only the year and the month. And it's got to be a different data type because that's what cast is for. That's all cast does, right? It's not a formatting tool. It actually is going to change the data type. So there must be something. You might look up Stack Overflow. You're looking up, oh my God, can't figure it out. Here's the trick. It's actually turning it into a string of characters and telling you to grab the first 7 characters of date. I don't have it down here, but it's the 4 characters of the year and then the dash and then the 2 characters of the month. And the way you do that is char. So we've been using varchar for variable characters, and that means like any amount of characters up to like a certain, like varchar 45 is like, yeah, you can be anywhere between 0 characters up to 45 characters, anything in between, right? Char, on the other hand, character, is more specific. It means like, okay, if I put in char 7 here, that has to be exactly 7 characters. It can't be any more or any less than that. So let's go ahead and try it here. And there we go. We get the year month. I don't know about you. I think that's a cheat. But again, it sort of makes sense. But even so, I'm going to call this year month cheat. And with that, I'm pretty sure we can get rid of the quotes now because, yeah, there's nothing reserved about that. So I'm quibbling over little points here, but let me just show you what you would normally do. Like if someone said to you, not as in like, yeah, show me you know how to use the cast function, but someone said to you, oh yeah, I need the date with the 4 character, the 4-digit year and the 2-digit month with a dash in between. This is not the way you would do it. I mean, I guess you could, but this is not the way you would do it. You would use date format. So date format, and we've been looking at this guy since very early in the semester, last semester. I think that it was one of the examples, like right from the beginning in chapter 1, where it's kind of doing the quick, overview of here's some of the stuff you can do in MySQL. I think date format was one of those guys all the way back to week 1. So date format, as in this one, we are going to call year month. Now we know to put the quotes around it. Date format, invoice date. And then we need a second argument where we tell it what to format it as. In the quotes, either singles or doubles. And you guys might remember this. You do a little percent here. So if you do like percent capital Y, that'll give you the 4-digit year. And then you put a dash and then percent and a lowercase m to give you those 2 digits of the month. And let's try it. Control Enter. And there it is. There's the same data over here. So is it shorter? No. Is it more commonly used? Yes, I would say. So anyway, you guys don't even have to have that last column in there if you want to. It only asked for these 3. I just threw in the last one to show you how I think you would normally do it instead of this kind of odd casting to a string. Okay, questions about number 2? My volume's on, right?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So mine came up as 18-08. So like your year month, it says 2018. Mine just came at 18.
I
What did
bet
I
you've
do?
got a lowercase y here. Let me try it out. I'm going to do a lowercase
Okay,
y.
yeah, I do have the lowercase
Yeah,
y.
that'll it. So yeah, it's just a matter of getting to know these uppercase. So like for instance, if we do uppercase M, it should give me the actual English name of the month. Yeah, there we go. And so, you kind of wish these would be exactly the same in all languages. And of course, they're all a little bit different from each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Any other questions about number 2? All right, let's go ahead and do number 3. Anybody? Anybody? Just kidding. There's no number 3. It's just these 2. I was hoping someone had actually read the chapter and say, hey, wait a minute, Bispo, there's... Never mind. Okay, so yeah, number 1, number 2, this is the shortest perspective out of the entire textbook, except for chapter 1, which doesn't have one. Let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this one.
Joke's on you. It's a 13th floor scenario. There's no number 3, but there's a number 4.
Darn it. Got me. Okay, what is this? This is Unit 5 already. So I'm going to make myself a new, not like that. like that. Open and save. Oh wait, let's give it a name here. Bispo. I realized just earlier that I misnamed Chapter 10. I called it Chapter 3 because I got confused because it was going into Unit 3. So just to let you know. This is going to be what? Bispo Chapter 8. Yes, .sql. And after we come back from break, that's the one thing I forgot to put up today. There weren't that many things. I could have managed it, I suppose, but I still need to put up the actual assignment and submission folder for Chapter 8. So hang on to this. Don't delete it. Save the file. And when we come back, which we're not going on break just yet, but when we do, when you come back, then you'll be able to submit that. And I'll remind you guys to make sure everybody gets it in. I'm finally getting caught up with grading here. I graded a couple things, so that'll all happen this week. You guys will be able to see where you're at in the coming days. Hopefully, I'd like to get it all caught up by tomorrow. Let's see if I can manage, or maybe like before we take the test on Wednesday. Okay, enough said about Chapter 8. Let's see, what are we doing next? Okay, we need to do the midterm exam review here. So let's go ahead and do that. And for that, oh, actually, let me stop the recording here. We're just, these are separate recordings, right? So we don't have to have too large of a clog. Let's go ahead and stop.